There are a lot of things in life that are really hard to believe unless you can see them, right? As a kid, I used to say, kids on the playground would brag about what they could do, and I remember, I don't know how many times I said, oh yeah, prove it. Show it. I can run faster than you. Oh yeah? Prove it. I can jump higher than you. My dad can beat up your dad. Oh yeah? Prove it, right? I want to see it. I'm not going to believe it until I see it. And the proof is in the seeing, because once you see it, then you can't argue anymore, right? Let me show you how this works. I brought a backpack full of things today. And I want to know whether you believe it, that I have some of these things, or if you don't believe it. So if I told you that in my backpack I had a chocolate Easter egg, who would believe it? Some of you don't, some of you do. Do you believe it? Who said show me? Who said that? Sasha, here you go. I have a chocolate Easter egg. Oh, good catch! Good perception. Well done. Thank you for believing. Well, you didn't believe. You made me prove it, didn't you? What if I told you that I had in here a euro coin? Would you believe it? Wow, you guys are getting more believing, aren't you? I have a euro coin, and it's all yours. Because you believed it, right? Now you all know I had it, because you saw it, right? What if I told you I had an American football in here? It's pretty big, right? Do I have an American football in here? How many of you believe it? Do I have a football? Julieta, you believe it? I have an inflatable American football in here. You may have it, and you may play with it later. Okay, now it's going to get harder. How many of you believe I have a snake in here? You believe I have a snake? I hate snakes. But you think I have it? Let's see. I have a snake. You may have this snake. Okay? What about a rhinoceros? You guys believe I have a rhinoceros in my bag? I do. And I'm sorry, I can't give it to you because this was a gift from my wife when she traveled to Africa, so I'm going to hold on to my rhinoceros. But I have it. One more. How many of you believe I have a 100-euro bill in here? Look, all the hands go up. Guess what? I don't. I don't. Right? The believing comes in the seeing, right? Before you caught on, right? Do you have a football? Most of you said, no, there's not a football in there because it wouldn't fit. Once you saw it, oh, I see it, right? The seeing is believing. And that's exactly what happens on this first Easter morning that we are celebrating here today, right? Jesus had told all of his disciples multiple times, guess what, guys? I'm going to die, and then 3 days later, I'm going to rise again. He had told them. And yet when the day comes and Mary runs and says, hey, guess what? The tomb is open. Nobody believes that he is alive, right? Because they can't see it. Right? Look at, we just heard that story. Derek and I read it to you at the very beginning of the service, right? And in that story that we read to you, Mary and Peter and John, they all saw the evidence of a resurrection, right? The passage goes right through and it says in verse 1 that Mary shows up and she saw the stone rolled away. She saw it with her own eyes. And then Peter and John join. You never get John's name. He says, the other disciple and the one that Jesus loved. Kind of humble, right? I'm the one Jesus loved, right? But it was John, okay? So they say that John shows up and he peeks in, and what does he see? He sees the strips of linen all laying there. That's what they wrap the body in. He sees the linen, but there's no body. Peter, he's the bold one, so he not only looks in, he walks all the way into the empty tomb. And it says that Peter then saw the headcloth that they laid over the head of the dead body. It was all folded up nicely and set off to the side. John then walks into the tomb following Peter, and in verse 8 it says that John went into the tomb, he saw, and he believed. What did he see? He saw all the evidence, right? The stone rolled away, the strips of linen, the headcloth. He saw the empty tomb. What did he believe? We don't know exactly. Maybe he's the first one to believe that Jesus rose from the dead. But even if he is, the very next verse told us that none of the disciples comprehended what this was all about. So even if he believed something, he wasn't sure exactly what this was yet. They saw all the evidence with their eyes, but they couldn't believe it, even though Jesus had told them. Because let's give them some grace here. It's hard to believe, isn't it? It's hard to believe that a dead body would come back to life. I'm reminded of the men's small group that meets on Thursday nights. We finished this book a few months ago, The Reason for God by Tim Keller, Belief in an Age of Skepticism. It's an apologetics book, right? And so it gives all the logical reasons why it makes sense to believe. Logically, why we should believe that God exists, why Jesus was real, why his death and resurrection makes sense. It's all the right evidence, right? It gives all the right evidence. And yet, I'd like to say that if I had a non-believing friend and I just said, hey, here, read this book. And if he just read the book and saw the evidence, he'd believe, right? Well, guess what? Plenty of people read that book and they still don't believe. You can have all the evidence, and it's still really hard to believe. So if the evidence doesn't convince us, if the evidence didn't convince Mary and Peter and John, what does convince them, and what does convince us? It's the same thing. Because as we read this story, as we hear the first resurrection story, what convinced Mary, what convinced the disciples, is when they saw Jesus with their own eyes. The seeing was the believing, right? So remember from the story Derek and I started with, when does Mary believe? She believes when all of a sudden she turns around and there's Jesus standing there. She doesn't recognize him at first, but then he speaks her name and she sees him for who he is and she believes, right? Verse 14 said that Mary saw Jesus standing there. Seeing is believing. When she saw Jesus, her eyes convinced her brain that the impossible had become a reality. And her brain gives her heart then permission to believe. And then it's the disciples' turn, right? Let me read on in that passage, a part that we didn't read for you earlier. Because here's what happens next. Verses 19 through 23. It says that on the evening of that first day of the week, when the disciples were together with the doors locked because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." And after he said this, he showed them his hands and his side, and the disciples were overjoyed when they saw the Lord. Right? When they saw him, they believed. And I love how it says that they were overjoyed. They saw him and they couldn't help but have this joy of believing, having it been proven to them, overflow out of their lives. Right? They believed when they saw the Lord. But remember, Thomas wasn't there, the one disciple who wasn't hiding with them. Thomas didn't see. And so when they went to Thomas and they said, guess what? We have seen the Lord. He says, I won't believe it unless I see. Unless I see. And you know what? We're going to talk about Thomas next Sunday. But his story ends with Jesus saying this to him. Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed. And you know who that is? That second part, blessed are those who have not seen and have believed. That's us. We don't have the opportunity to see Jesus physically the way that the disciples do, right? We can't, like Thomas was given the offer. When he saw Jesus, Jesus said, here's my hands. Go ahead and put your finger in the hole in my hand. Here's my side where the spear went in. Go ahead and touch it if you need proof. See me and believe. We can't see him physically because he has ascended into heaven and he is there physically, waiting to come back as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. We are the ones who have not seen and yet have believed. And yet, the other side of that coin, I want to tell you today that you and I can still see Jesus. In fact, just like Mary, just like the disciples, just like Thomas, it is in our seeing of Jesus that we believe. It's our seeing of Jesus that convinces us of the truth of his resurrection. Yes, we cannot see him physically until he returns again. And at that moment, everybody's going to see him, right? Every knee is going to bow because seeing is believing. When he returns, everyone will believe because there he is. You can't deny the truth. But Jesus is still here working in this world, moving in our lives, and we just need to open our eyes to be able to see him still today. So you're wondering, how in the world do we get to see him? How do I see Jesus today? Well, there's a couple ways that all of us can see Jesus. And the truth is, you and I can see Jesus when we open this book and read his story. Right? The truth of Jesus comes alive to you and to me when we read the story of his life and of his love, and when we read it with open minds and open hearts. If you read this book wanting to believe, truly wanting to see God, the Holy Spirit will help you see Jesus, and your mind will begin to be able to believe that the impossible is possible, that Jesus did rise from the dead. And like the disciples, your heart will begin to overflow with joy. Right? The evidence of God's truth in Jesus Christ is all right here. Right? The stone rolled away, the empty grave closed. Now, the life of Jesus, if you read Tim Keller's book, the life of Jesus is one of the most historically documented lives in history. Right? All the evidence is there. But the belief comes when the Holy Spirit convinces and convicts you and shows you Jesus. And you see him for who he is. Let me give you this invitation today. If you're wondering about how this works, I would invite you over the next week to read just the small book of John. The Gospel of John is one of the 4 Gospels, the story of Jesus' life. Read the book of John and read it this week with the assumption that it's true. Believing that everything you're reading is from God and is true. read it asking God to help you see Jesus for who he is. And if you are honest with that, I'd be really interested to hear what God shows you. Because with an open heart and an open mind like that, as you read the story of Jesus' life, you're going to see his love and his grace and his sacrifice and his resurrection, and you're going to know that it's for you. If you've never read John before, if you don't believe you can see Jesus in this book, take God's invitation to read it and see Jesus and believe. But we can see Jesus not only in this book that shows him to us, but you and I, every single one of us, can see Jesus at work in our daily lives. Every single day. You can experience his presence and his power and his goodness and his love working in you right now. Jesus is always at work in our lives. We just don't always choose to see him, do we? Instead, we call it good luck when it was Jesus at work in our lives. We see our own talents and our own skills and our own hard work when it was Jesus blessing us. We see our own smart choices, our own wise investments when it was Jesus working in us, his goodness in us that we should be seeing. If you and I are willing to open our eyes and see Jesus at work in our lives, we will see him. Right? When we see the blessings come in that we don't deserve and didn't earn, that's Jesus. When we see good friends coming into our lives that seem like they just randomly came and yet we love them and they love us, that's not random, that's Jesus. When you experience peace in your heart in the middle of the turmoil of your life, when it doesn't make sense to have peace, that's Jesus in you. When you're faced with a challenge that you're convinced that you will not be able to accomplish, that it's beyond you, and you find strength to do it, you know what that is? That's not you being strong enough. That's Jesus at work in your life. When you are in the middle of sorrow and sadness and grief, and you find comfort, and you find peace in the middle of that whirlwind, that's Jesus. When we open our eyes and choose to see him, we will see him at work in our lives, because he's there whether you realize it or not. So, not only open your Bible and see him there, open your heart to see him at work this afternoon in your life, tomorrow morning in your life, because he's there. Can I tell you one more story? It's an Old Testament story. And it's a story of a snake. In fact, I think I gave my snake over here. Can I borrow it? I'll give it back to you in a little while, okay? Because this story is all about snakes. And it's from Numbers chapter 21, if you ever want to read it on your own. Back in that chapter, the people of Israel, the whole nation of Israel, has left slavery in Egypt, and they're wandering in the desert heading to the promised land, right? And Moses is their leader. And if you remember that story, if you've ever heard it, they are not very good followers. They like to complain, and they like to whine at Moses and at God, because they're never happy with the food that God gives them, and they're always thirsty, and they don't trust him to get them water when they want to have water, even though he always does. And in Numbers 21, they whine and complain again, and God has had enough, right? They say, I just wish we were back in Egypt. This is horrible. Moses, you brought us out here to kill us, right? And what happens in their camp, God sends these snakes into their camp. And they're poisonous snakes. And whoever gets bitten by one of these snakes, there's no cure. And so parents are losing their children, and children are losing their parents, and grandparents are watching their grandkids die, and it's horrible. And they do the only thing they know they can do. They go back to God and say, I'm so sorry. We were wrong. We were wrong. Please save us. Please take this poison out of our camp. And God says yes. Of course, he loves his children and he wants them back home again. Now, God could have simply said, with a word, snakes be gone. And they would have just disappeared. Problem solved. It's not what he does. He says to Moses, I want you to, Moses must have been a little bit of an artist, because he said, I want you to make a snake out of bronze. Fashion a snake, put it on a pole, and set it in the middle of the camp. So here's this pole with on the top this bronze snake hanging up on top of this pole. And God said, anyone who gets bitten by a snake and looks at that bronze snake, goes to the center of camp and looks at that snake, will be healed. All the poison will be gone. Moses does that, and it works. Right? God's grace is given to them when they look at the snake on the pole. The poison is gone. You know, God told that story. God made that story come true again. This time it wasn't a snake on a pole. This time it was his son on a cross. Now he hung up there on that cross and he said to them, he said, anybody who looks up at my son on this cross, the poison of sin, the poison of guilt, it's all going to be washed away. It will all be taken away. And you will live if you look at my son. That life-giving offer is still yours and mine today. It's what we're here to celebrate. We're not looking at Jesus hanging on the cross. We're looking at the empty cross. We're looking at the empty cross. And that's where our salvation is found. Now, God isn't going to force you to look and see. God's going to invite you. And anyone who wants to see him will see. Jesus himself says this. He says, ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be opened to you. For everyone who asks receives. And the one who seeks finds. And to the one who knocks, the door will be open. If you seek, if you want to see Jesus, you'll see him. He's there. If you have questions about this, if you have questions about Jesus and what this is all about, feel free to ask them. Now's a great time. Come see me. Talk to a friend who brought you. Because Jesus wants to be seen by you. If you've seen him and you want that life that he offers, that joy, that relationship with God, boldly stand with him. And if you're ready to declare that publicly, come see me and let's celebrate together. And if you need more time, if you have more questions, that's okay. Ask those questions. In fact, next Sunday we're going to be looking at Thomas, doubting Thomas. If you have doubts, you're in good company. It might be good to come back again next Sunday and learn from another doubter. In the meantime, God's invitation to all of us. Keep your eyes open and see Jesus, because the risen Jesus is here with you every moment. He's offering you his love, his grace, his salvation. He's offering you himself. Don't miss it. Open your eyes. Open your heart. Seeing is believing. Pray with me, would you?